It should be working. Let's bring that there. You know, it's just like running your own little video production studio nowadays, you know?
That's right.
Okay, it says we're live, so I'm assuming we're live.
Well, I'm alive. Are you alive?
I'm alive. So far, so good, but the day's still young.
It is Monday. It is Monday. Well, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Cheers to our coffee. I'm great.
Wonderful. And it's doing weird things. It says one person wants to join us. And so I'm trying to get them in on our group because we don't want anybody missing out. Welcome, Ann Hilton. Hopefully you're going to be there with us here. Okay, so, all righty. How are you today, Lori?
I'm doing very well.
Wonderful.
Great.
Okay.
Just looking forward to, talking about new forms. It's always fun.
It is always fun, isn't it? It's that time of year, just like, Christmas in December, we get new forms in June. Well, it's
and December.
It's midway through the year, so we'll just, we got to have some kind of highlights right now, right?
Right. And we've been talking about COVID forms for so long now that people are maybe a little tired of new forms, but the good news is there's no new COVID forms to talk about. I just verified.
I know. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, I don't know if I could take it. It's so hard. It is just so hard out there trying to arrange showings and do this and do that. And, it's yes, thank God there's no COVID forms. But what do you have? I have no idea what we have here. So I'm just going to let you go, girlfriend.
Well, great. Yeah. So I'll just remind everybody that twice a year, CAR publishes new forms. And so it is that time of year, June and December. And if you thought it used to be different months, it used to be different months, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been changed. So we won't talk about that. We'll just talk about what is now. So June and December. And so we've been inundated with the COVID forms that we all kind of forgot. Oh yeah, there's going to be some other new forms coming up. On the good news, the updated RPA was delayed for another year. So we would have been starting to talk about the new RPA.
Oh, that would have been too much. My head would have exploded.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the new RPA, and quite honestly, I think we could have handled it. It's not a way, it didn't change how we operate, just the layout was different. But all of the terms were all the same. But it was determined that it was just a little too much for us all at once. So that's fine. So we won't be talking about that for another year. That will come out December of 2021. So we'll just take that off the table. But CAR did have a couple new forms come out and several revisions. And so I'm going to go over those with everybody. Keep it simple. But I do want to just let you know that the way they come up with new forms, a lot of people don't know. They just think, well, CAR just comes up with forms all the time. Well, they come up with forms based on the calls that they get on the legal hotline and conversations that they have with companies, with brokerages, brokers and agents to see what's going on and what do we need. And so their goal is to always help us by providing something in writing, by providing forms. So we're very fortunate that we have that opportunity. I know it gets crazy, but I do have my sample forms book I want to show everybody. Because if you ever call me with a question on a form, I'll always say, let me get my book. Here's the book.
Honestly, I am so jealous. I've always wanted one of those.
So the most recent issue is from January 2020, and it has 578 pages in it.
Oh boy.
Over 300 forms. So one of the questions I get often is, why do companies require so many forms for the checklist? So let me just remind you, there are over 300 forms in this book, and nobody has a checklist, not even me, that's 300 forms.
Well, thank God. Okay.
And if anyone would probably want to have all the forms, it might be me.
It would be her. Trust me, it would be Lori.
So this book is published twice a year, and it's $100. So it's not for the faint of heart to just be buying one, because I literally just got this in February and it's technically going to be outdated now. But I'm just going to print out my new forms and probably get a new one at the end of the year. So
I know what to get you for Christmas.
Oh, well, no. That's okay.
Oh,
So,
well.
yeah. I mean, it's a nice gesture, but that's okay. That's a business expense, not a gift. Darn.
That'd be my business expense.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
So
go on.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can show everybody where to find this information. And I just checked at 9:50, the new forms are not out yet. So when they release them, they let us know they will be coming out the week of. And this one was going to be the week of June 22nd. So today is the 22nd. It may or may not, they may or may not come out today. So far, they're not out. But they could come out this afternoon. They could come out tomorrow. They could come out Friday. As soon as I see them, I'll post in the nerdy group that yes, the forms are out. So, I'm only going to check maybe twice a day, not every 10 minutes. So hopefully I'll catch it, as soon as it hits, but I'm not going to be checking all day long. So where you find this information about the form changes. Now, obviously you're going to find the new forms in zip forms, but where to go to find the information about the changes is going to be on the CAR website. And you just click on the Transaction Center tab. And when it opens up, it defaults to zip forms, and you just click on standard forms. Once it redirects, then you're going to see the forms revision link. So we'll wait for it to load. All right, so down here, forms revisions and new forms releases. That's the link that we're going to click on. And now we're going to see the list of the new forms and the revisions. So, well, actually, we're going to see the link to the quick summary. It's a 12-step process, just in case you were wondering.
Like other 12-step processes.
Yes. All right, so now we're on the June 2020 forms release. So I like to take a quick peek at the quick summary guide when I first get wind of the new forms are ready to be reviewed, because this is an excellent summary. This is a chart that lets us know which forms have been changed and if it's okay to use the previous version. So we're going to stay on this page for a minute or two. The first two forms are the new forms, and you'll know that because it says replaces. Well, if there's nothing listed, then it's a new form. So we have two new forms. We have a property visit and open house advisory, and we have a square footage and lot size advisory. So these are the two forms we're going to talk about in just a minute. And you can see over here, okay to use prior version, and these say new. So once again, confirming these are new. But pay attention to this column on revised forms, because N means no. You can't use a previous version. And a lot of the forms in this revision are no. So we have two new forms, we have 11 revisions. And of the revisions, only three of the 11, we can use the previous version. So it's important that you know which forms have changed and that you verify that your templates will now have the updated versions once they're released. But just know that any transaction where you've already created that form is not going to be substituted out with the new version. The old version exists, but in your template should update. So I'm going to skip out of here, and we're going to look at the actual forms. Actually, I'm going to go back to that because I forgot to mention one of the most important things on that form, which is the column that I didn't mention, which is the brief description of the form and how the form was revised. So when you jump on zip forms, that's this column here. When you jump on zip forms, you'll just see the changed form. And if you don't look at this summary, or you didn't happen to catch the red line version of the forms, you're not going to know what's changed. So this is a great way for you to know what has changed. And in an example of a revised form, this DIA, it talks about language that's added. Okay, so we're going to look at those forms, and I have my summary printed out so I can give you the sneak peek of what those changes are. So here you'll see the new forms. We've got the property visit and open house advisory, and the square footage and lot size advisory. I'm going to talk about the square footage one first. So for a long while now, after the Haruki lawsuit, we've all been wondering, how should we properly disclose square footage, and what if there are discrepancies? So a few companies have made their own disclosure, and it looks very much like this. So I think they sent their form, their version to CAR and says, this is what we're looking for. And so now we have this form. So this is a advisory, a disclosure and advisory that is signed only by the sellers and the buyers. So the agent doesn't sign this form. And so then, you wonder, well, then who fills out the form? Well, the seller fills out the form. The seller lists all of the square footage information that they know of. They check a box if they have a report that they're attaching where they got this information from. So most of the time the sellers don't have this information. So where are they going to get it? They're going to get it from their listing agent. So this is a collaborative disclosure where the listing agent and the seller will fill out this information together, but the person responsible for it is the seller. The seller represents, okay, that they're not aware of any other measurements. And you'll see in paragraph 4, the broker obligations. Okay, so it is our obligation to make sure that if we have that information, we share it with the seller. And in 2 spots, it mentions, hey buyer, if this is a material fact for you, you may want to do your own investigations. So this is a document that is optional. It's not mandated by law, but I can tell you that my brokerage will be implementing it because it's very helpful. And Lisa, as a practicing agent, one of my agents, what do you think?
I love it. I think it's about time. We have, gosh, just looking at this form, we have Inside Track that gives us floor plans from the builders. We have the public record, which definitely does not match what Inside Track says. We have the multiple listing service where previous agents have put the homes in the MLS for previously. And it's amazing how the houses grow over the years. They just grow. Then if your client has an appraisal and they'll say, but it measured out at this. So I love it because at least now we have all of the sources for the square footage that we can give and cover ourselves. So I think it's great. Love it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the tricky part is going to be making sure that the agent remembers all of the sources they may have used and provide that information to the seller so that it will get on this form. So even though it is a form that is designed to be completed by the seller, it really needs to be a collaboration. We don't know yet, if the agent had information and forgot to tell the seller, what could happen. We don't know. So my best advice is just, if you as the agent are using information, be sure to provide that. Maybe it's a printout from Inside Track, just provide it to them. And then they can always attach it. And then here's the direct source. We didn't make this number up. We didn't go on Inside Track and dream about the numbers. We printed it out and here it is. So that might be a good way to facilitate it. I think this group will be a good group as we all start using it to provide input to each other on, how's it working? What's something you forgot to do that we all can learn from? So this is always a good source to be able to share that information. That way we all get better.
Exactly. No, that's wonderful.
So now I'm going to open up the second one, the second new form, which is property visit and open house advisory.
This should be fun.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So this is a good reminder for any visitor to a property that there are some risks in entering the property. There may be recording devices. There may be some unsafe situations. There may be animals and pets. It talks about bringing minors with you to the property and just a general risk of injury. So this is a form that, again, is for our risk management. It's to help us, and it's not mandated by law, so it's optional. So, I think that because we are currently using the PED forms and we're getting very familiar with how to facilitate asking anyone that enters the home to sign that advisory, we're going to start to see this being used in that same way. Because as a listing agent, I definitely want anyone that enters the property to say, yes, I understand the risks. And if I'm out showing property for one of my buyers, I want them to know there's a risk. But where there's no clear instruction is this form going to be required by listing agents? Is an agent that's holding an open house in the future going to require this to be signed when any visitor arrives? That's the part I think we don't know yet, and we're going to have to see what makes sense. So I can easily see if I'm going to take out a buyer, I'm going to give them this form and I'm going to have it for my file. And if I go to a listing and they say, hey, we want this form completed, I'll already have it and I can send it over. Where I'm not sure is, will agents be comfortable in hosting open houses in the future and asking anyone that enters to sign it? I'm not sure.
That's going to be a trick.
I think some might, but I don't know that everyone will feel comfortable with that. So again, this will be a great place for us to just sort of share how it's working.
Yeah, and I think since it's not asking for information, I think people would probably be a little bit more inclined to sign it than it would be, hi, would you, log in here as my guest with your email and your telephone number. So, it may work better. I think it's a good idea. Theory is excellent. The practical application will be the interesting part. So once we get back to doing open houses, even though I'm hearing a lot of people are doing open houses and they're not supposed to be doing them. But once we get back to that, when that day comes, this should be good. And I like it for having buyers. I think that's great.
Yeah, definitely. Because if they get injured or they didn't know they might be recorded, this is your proof that you let them know, and they take on that responsibility. So
I like the fact it says inside and outside, because Ring doorbells are very special little things that we don't always remember, that the homeowner can be recording and listening to us live while we're standing on the front porch.
Good point.
Yes. Experience speaking here. So.
All right, so there are 11 revised forms. We're not going to go through all 11 because no one would want to sit through that. If you would like to sit through it, CAR has a wonderful 1 hour and 5 minute recording of going over all the forms, but I won't torture everybody. Mainly because several of them are related to property management. So this first one, CTT, Notice of Change in Terms of Tenancy. It's a property management form. Notice to quit, notice of termination of tenancy, notice to perform or cure covenant or quit, notice to pay rent or quit. So those 5 forms are all property management forms. And what was updated on them is the language to conform to the Tenant Protection Act, which is the rent cap and just cause eviction act. And so the forms needed to be updated to conform and to also allow for if the property is subject to the act or not, the property is exempt or not. So if you're doing property management, you definitely want to take a look at that. The quick summary, that chart that I showed originally, does a really good job of explaining what was changed. And if you go to this page, you can click on it and you can see the redlined versions. And so if you use any of these forms, I recommend going there right away before they remove it, and you can see all the red lines. And this way you can compare with the previous version. And as you can see, this form has a lot of red. This form was originally 1 page, and now it's 2 pages. But it required by law to have that language added to it. So that's important. That's useful for us. So we're going to skip 5 of the 11. I'm going to do a couple of the real quick ones, and then we'll talk about the meaty ones, the ones that we use all the time and have some changes. So I'm going to click on the RCSD, the representative capacity signature disclosure for buyers. They added a box in case there is an assignment of this agreement, then this form would need to be used. If this form applies to a transaction and then there's an assignment, you would need to have all parties sign at that time, that they're accepting this representative capacity. So not a huge change. It was just something that was missing. And so they added it, you know, they already had it time of sale and at time of buyer representation. Now it's at time of assignment. And that doesn't apply very often. So if those words did not make any sense to you, then you probably have not had that type of transaction and you may not ever. So if you encounter that, talk to your broker. They'll walk you through it. Okay, then there is a updated septic inspection disclosure. And they've added in some language regarding some specifics related to the septic tank as well as propane tanks. So if you're in an area where you use this form, just know this form has been updated and take a look at what those updates are. And that one, it is okay to use the previous version, but you always want to use the most current version. That protects you the most because you have the most current language. And let's see. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the meaty ones. Well, I'll call them the meaty ones. So we're going to pull up the listing agreement. We all use the listing agreement. And so there have been a number of changes. And again, the best way to see the changes is to pull up this version here to get the red line. And you can see on page 1, nothing changed. Okay, that's cool. On page 2 though, whoops, I scrolled too fast. On page 2, paragraph 5 was a giant paragraph and it had a giant box. And so what they did is they tried to clean it up, make it a little easier to navigate, and separate out the box where the decision is being made to opt in or out of the MLS. Okay, so with that, let me take a quick look at my notes. Let's see.
Looks like we have a big blurb on the clear cooperation policy.
Yeah, so that's new. So starting with paragraph 5 was the multiple listing service paragraph. This is a new paragraph, this new paragraph 6. And so that changed all the paragraphs below that. And paragraph 7 is new. It does talk about the clear cooperation policy. And I want to remind everybody that if you are a subscriber to CRMLS, the clear cooperation policy applies. So almost half of the realtors in the state of California are a member of CRMLS. So therefore, it applies to at least half of the realtor population. Here in Orange County and surrounding counties, most of us are on CRMLS. So this applies. But don't be confused because it defaults to the rule applies, but if it doesn't, see paragraph 7E. But when you get to 7E, all it says is this doesn't apply. So you have to know if it applies or not. And so I am affirmatively telling you, if you're part of CRMLS, it applies. So do not check this number E and try to make it not applicable because that's incorrect. We're part of CRMLS. The rule applies. So it defaults to that, yes, it applies. It helps explain to the seller what public marketing is. And there's the seller instructions to the broker about putting it on the MLS or not. This may in the future replace the SELM, but for right now it's not, but it references the SELM. And so here's where you can make your elections directly on the contract, but if the SELM is going to apply, you still need to attach it. Make sense so far?
Makes
All
sense
right.
to me.
Makes sense
But
to you?
what if you're like, let's say you're up in LA and you're part of CLAW that's reciprocal to CRMLS or whatever. Are they bound by, are all of the MLSs bound by this?
Not all of the MLSs are bound by it. So if it's an association-owned MLS, then it may not apply. But you as a subscriber need to know if that applies or not. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know those reciprocal ones. I almost would think they do because they ultimately end up in CRMLS, but I don't know the rule on that. I don't know how it applies if it's a reciprocal. So if you are not a CRMLS subscriber and you're on another MLS, then you should already at this point know whether it applies or not, because the rule went into effect May 1st. And so you probably already know whether it applies or not. But there are some MLSs that are owned by the associations, and they're usually smaller associations. Those are technically not part of the requirement, although they may have opted in. And so then again, you have to know whether the rule applies to you or not.
Well, maybe on one of our Monday morning coffee and compliance, we can talk about clear cooperation, maybe even get a special guest.
We may want to get a special guest, because as well versed as I am on it, I don't know all the answers and I don't want to give wrong information. I only know for our
subject.
Yeah, we definitely, maybe we can even bring in somebody from the MLS to go over it. But I certainly I'm pretty well versed on it. But in terms of if it's in another area and does it apply or not, I don't know.
Well, we'll work on that.
Okay, that sounds good. So there's some other information about MLS data on there. So take a look at that. Not a lot has changed with that, but the language has been cleared up just to make it a little less confusing. In this paragraph 10, broker and seller's duties, you'll notice this little paragraph in red. This was in another spot. They've moved it here to remind everybody that the broker agrees to present all offers received for the property and present them to the seller as soon as possible, unless the seller gives the broker written instructions to the contrary. So that's been moved here. And it also talks about if you can get the HOA docs ahead of time, that would be beneficial. It's not a requirement, but it's a suggestion. When you get to the agency relationship paragraph, all of the red, all they did was bold each of these headers. So they were already bold, they capitalized them all. And so now they're bold and they're capital. So that's all they did with that. None of the information there changed. And there's some expanded language in the key safe and lockbox paragraph. So we already had the opportunity to ask the seller if certain people could have access to the lockbox, and they said yes. But this expands to add even more categories of people that might be using the lockbox, so that we don't have to ask permission each time. Now, we still want to coordinate a schedule, but we don't have to ask their approval if an appraiser can use a lockbox, if the appraiser even has access to the lockbox. And it doesn't seem like many of them do, at least in my experience. So those are the changes with the listing agreement. The main thing is the clear cooperation information, expanding out that language so that the seller understands, and you make your selections here. But again, for now, the SELM is still required until further notice. And it may not ever go away, but it's sounding like it might in the future. And that's why CAR wanted to create the form, lay it out in such a way that if that change does happen, the form is already ready. And so we also have the SELM has been updated as well to be consistent with some of what we already saw in the listing agreement. So you'll just notice there's an expanded paragraph on clear cooperation, more information here. And again, it defaults to the MLS requires brokers to participate. And again, just like the previous discussion we just had, you have to know whether you're required to comply or not. And CRMLS users are required. And paragraph D gives you the option to check the box that the MLS has not adopted the NAR clear cooperation policy. So for our purposes on CRMLS, we would not check the box. However, we still would fill out these sections below if we are not going to submit the listing to the MLS and we're going to use an SELM form. So it looks a little confusing because, oh, well, if I don't check the box, maybe I don't fill this out, but that's not the case. You still fill that out. And it reminds you about, this is a similar language from the listing agreement, the instructions to the agent to put it in the MLS and when. All right, so now the last one, which is a very important change but a very minor change. And that sounds contradictory, and I know, but when the form pulls up, it'll hopefully make a little more sense. So the last form is the TDS. So as of January 1, the statute changed. And so the form had to be updated. And not a lot of people understand that CAR doesn't create the TDS form. This is actually written in statute and laid out in a very specific way. And so the statute was changed, and there are essentially, there's one change with kind of two parts. So you'll notice if we just scroll through here, there's only one line in red on this entire form. So there's only one change. So that's why I say it's a minor change, but it's a significant change. So if we think back to how we operate, we've all just kind of skipped paragraph 1. You know, we make sure we fill out the top, we put our date, we jump down to paragraph 2 as the seller occupying. And everyone kind of ignored paragraph 1. Well, the new law, as of January 1, says if you do not fill out paragraph 1, or section 1 rather, this form is incomplete. And we all know if we have an incomplete TDS, we've got a major problem. So we now have to select one of these boxes, and they added this line here. I hate when it does that. No substituted disclosures for this transfer. Because when they changed it in the law, they added more reference to the substituted disclosures and wanted to allow us to say, well, there are none being used. And so this line was added. Okay, so I called CAR Legal this morning because as many times as I've read this paragraph since the webinar I attended on June 9th, still just kept interpreting it different ways. So I called CAR Legal this morning just to be sure that I understood it right. And the answer that I was given is that, hey, we all ignored paragraph 1 before. So nothing has changed in how we're operating. If we are operating exactly the same way as we were before this form came out and before January 1, then we are not providing substituted disclosures. Therefore, we would check this box that there are no substituted disclosures. Where I kept reading it and getting confused is this to me looks like a definition, substituted disclosures. It's in bold and there's a colon and there's some information, which to me read like, well, the natural hazard disclosure sounds like it's a substituted disclosure because they specifically call it out. Well, when I spoke to Howard at CAR, he says, what this means is that if you are doing the normal disclosures you normally would, with the seller providing their disclosures and filling this out, with the seller providing an NHD, with a termite inspection being part of the transaction, there are no substituted disclosures. You're not doing anything different than what we normally do, what is normally expected, what is the standard of care. So therefore, we would check no substituted disclosures. So I asked the question, well, then what's a substituted disclosure? When would I ever use that? And he said, well, it's not very common. I said, okay, so let me ask this question. If we're doing a relocation transaction and the seller filled out the disclosures, but now the seller no longer owns it because the relocation company owns it. The relocation company doesn't have any idea. They are now the owner. They're not exempt from the disclosure, but they have no information. So if they pass along that previous owner's disclosure, would that be a substituted disclosure? And his answer first was no, and then he thought about it, and then he said, no, I think, yeah, that would be an example. So it seems like it's going to be a very rare transaction where we do something outside of the normal practice. And if we do something outside of the normal residential practice, then that may be a substitute. We may be providing a substituted disclosure, in which case we can just check one of the other boxes and list whatever that disclosure may be.
So from looking at the boxes, I mean, the only real thing that I would see here, I mean, your relocation company examples, you know, spot on, because that's very common. But for the first one that says inspection reports completed, and I'm sorry, can't read it that well here.
Yeah,
would that be like, let's say somebody did a pre-sale home inspection to see what was wrong with their house, and if it listed every single thing in it, and for some reason the person couldn't fill out this form, could they check that box and include that inspection report and not complete the rest of the form? Not that we would do such a thing, but
Yeah, I mean, a seller is not exempt from filling out the TDS unless they truly are exempt. And so in that case, according to CAR, anything we provided in addition would not be considered a substituted disclosure, because a pre-inspection would be something that would be part of the norm. In some areas, it is part of the norm. They do pre-inspections. Here in our area, we don't typically do that, but it would still be considered an inspection as part of the contractual requirement. So I would say that that answer from CAR would be no, that doesn't apply. You would still consider box 3, no substituted disclosures. Although I understand your question and your interpretation of it, and I kind of lean that same way. If I'm going to be providing anything that is different, if I'm going to be providing any information that I couldn't complete on this form on my own, and I'm attaching it, then to me, that's a substituted disclosure. It may not substitute the entire disclosure, but it's a portion of the disclosure. So what I was told was that they're trying to get this language cleaned up again and removed so that it doesn't cause the confusion that it is now caused. But personally, I don't see any harm if, here's what I would do. If I wasn't entirely sure if something may or may not be considered a substituted disclosure, I would probably click one of the boxes, probably the second box, and just write out what I'm including. And then I'm still making the rest of my disclosure on the remainder of the form. I'm just saying, hey, in addition, look at these other reports.
Yeah, because I'm seeing this more like, let's say, something where somebody's out of state. Maybe, they're selling, a condo that they hung on to that they rented out for a while or something like that. And, we're saying, check the box, the seller's not occupying the property, but if they did like an inspection, knowing they're going to be putting it on the market, but they haven't seen the place, they don't even remember what was in there. Maybe a situation like that would work. Maybe.
I mean, again, it doesn't exempt them from disclosing. So they could say they're not occupying the property. They may or may not know whether the property has a garbage disposal or not. They may or may not know, they should know if it has a pool, even if they've not seen it. So they should still be able to fill out some of this information. And remember, the questions that it asks are you aware or do you have knowledge? And if you've not been to the property, then you may not have knowledge, although you might have knowledge. And if you do, you have to disclose, but you may not. And so they could mark no, and they could mark no again, and they could mark no on everything. And they're not exempt from completing this. They still have to complete it to their best of their knowledge. I think that those other documents, those other inspections may be considered supplements versus substitutes. I think that's kind of the interpretation that, CAR is using. But again,
I'm trying to find a square peg to jam in this round hole.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty confident when I called in that, I was going to be able to have a thoughtful discussion on, why I'm reading it this way. And, he listened to me, he heard me, but I think they've gotten this question a bunch of times and they're just convinced like, there's nothing different, so don't worry about it. Most of the time, even in their webinar and on the PowerPoint, it says majority of the time you're going to be marking this box. So I think that if you're in doubt, hey, if you were the listing agent and I was representing the buyer and you checked this box number 2 and you listed an NHD report and a termite report and a pre-inspection, I don't think I'm going to have an issue with you saying, well, is that a substitute disclosure or not? To me, it's additional information. It's the information you needed to pass along anyway. So whether it's defined as substitute or not, probably doesn't matter. But here's why I started by saying it's an important change. Although it's minor in the fact that it's one line, it's very confusing.
We have a comment from Daniel Wu. Good morning, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
And it says, what about during probate listing when the seller has never lived in the property?
So if they're exempt, then they use the exempt seller disclosure.
Okay, Daniel, that's your answer.
And I haven't seen any mention that the exempt seller disclosure has this language, has this added. I'd have to take a look. Let me look in my handy dandy book.
And Daniel's coming back for more. Now he says, don't they submit an alternative form where they say they don't know any of the questions?
Yeah, I think that's the exempt. I haven't looked at the exempt one in a while. Let me take a quick peek.
Daniel, you must be sitting in the back row because these are back row kind of questions.
Yeah, I mean, the exempt seller disclosure really only has what is formally the SSD, the seller statutory disclosure. That's really all that's there. So if the seller is exempt, they would fill out this form. And even the exempt one says, this is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principal may wish to obtain. But I think if they had disclosures and wanted to pass them along, they could indicate those are an additional inspection if they are not exempt, because on the exempt, they don't have those boxes, but they would still want to provide any info that they had.
And Daniel comes back again saying, so does filing the exempt qualify here as a substitute form?
No, they're not, it wouldn't be a substitute. We wouldn't have to use this form to then indicate the exempt seller disclosure is a substitute for it. We simply wouldn't use this form at all. In theory, yeah, that would make sense if we still had to use this form. So good one, Daniel. But you wouldn't have to use this form. You'd go direct to the other one, and therefore you don't have to worry about it here and reference that other one as a substitute.
Perfect. And if anybody has any questions, throw them on in the comments. As you can tell, I will feed them to Lori as they come in.
And I will do my best, because this is something, like I said, I mean, I read it multiple times. I had a conversation with another broker. We were talking it through. And at the end of the conversation, we're just like, wow, okay, well, we're going to have to call CAR Legal.
And Daniel says, thanks.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for the question.
So any other new forms that we should be working on?
That's it.
That's it.
That's enough.
Okay, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah, no, really, it's not terrible. It's a relatively long list, but again, 5 of the 11 revisions were property management. We have property management, so our property manager is going to know those forms intimately. The two.
So remember that, everybody, if you're looking for property managers, we're your girls.
Yep, definitely.
Sorry,
so we have the
shameless plug.
We have the 2 new forms. We have the 11 changes. There are also 11 silent revisions, which means—
Ooh, tell us what a silent revision is.
A silent revision is they corrected like a typo, something so minor that they don't even make it onto the list of revised forms, because they're just something that they fixed, that they don't have to publicly tell everybody. But sometimes you'll notice it because you'll see that the revision date is more current than you remembered. They don't even give us the red line to show us that they added a comma or removed a comma, or back in the day, a couple years ago, changed BRE back to DRE. So they do things like that behind the scenes. And so I don't even know which forms they are.
Oh, so it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. So they're out there, but you don't know where. So you gotta find them, and then you pat yourself on the back and say, good job.
If you want to take the time to compare all the forms like that, go for it. But they're nothing that would be how we change how we operate. Otherwise, it would have made it to the revised form list, because those are things we need to know. If they've moved a paragraph or changed a paragraph, Those are things that we need to know.
Perfect. Well,
Okay.
fantastic. Any other, breaking news of the week since last week
Since last week,
besides this?
no, I think it's been relatively quiet. I have a group of brokers that we meet each week, and we kind of talk about what's going on out there. And most recently, it's been related to COVID, and just how in the real world, how are we practicing? How are the peds working? Have we come to peace with the peds? Little jokes like that, but nothing drastic. But I think everybody is experiencing that there's a lot of confusion out there and a lot of inconsistency out there. And so that's why I love this group, because if nothing else, we've got about 500 people in this group who hopefully will all be operating the same way, and hopefully setting that great example for others. And if we do not, if we don't see that consistency, then we can at least, be kind to one another and make sure that we're educating people, because sometimes that's really all it is. As much as us nerds pay attention to all this information that comes out, there are a lot of people who are not as nerdy as we are, and they've missed the memo, even though it's come out in 1,000 different forms. So it's up to us to just kind of expand and educate the agents that we interact with.
Well, that is great. And my gardeners just showed up. So why don't we, unless you guys all want to hear a lawnmower, because I can't shut the window because I'm here. But if anybody has any ideas that they, stuff they want to talk about on compliance, if you have questions on it, shoot us a message, because, it's nice if we're able to help the group learn something that the group wants to learn. And I think we're like 4 people away from 500. So
Right.
invite a friend. Let's hit that 500 mark and do some good stuff out there. So, I will throw one question out before my gardener gets real close to the window. If somebody sees an open house being done, what should they do?
That's $1 million question right now. There is no specific instruction on what to do. It's up to us, though, to police each other. And, you may want to initially try to reach out to the broker, and just say, hey, just wanted you to know your agent is conducting what looks very openly to me like an open house. If you've got open house signs, in my opinion, you're doing an open house. You do not need to direct somebody with signage who has a pre-appointment with you. They have the address, they can put it in their GPS. And just let that broker know. The broker may or may not be aware of what's going on. They may think that their agents are doing by appointment only and not doing open houses. So I would first start with the broker. If you feel like you're not going to get anywhere with that, or it's just a habit of that agent, then you may want to file a grievance claim with the association.
And Daniel's saying snitch, and Susie's saying yes, and Pam, no, they should call you.
Me?
Pam Pedigo.
Right.
He says, I think we should have him call Lisa. And it's like, no, they're going to call Pam. Or you can call Lori. She's higher up the food chain,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's nothing that we as individuals can do. But if we file the grievance claims with the association, remember, although these are guidelines, and we kind of talked a little bit about this last week, guidelines become the standard of care. If you don't interpret the word guideline as the rule, or as it's not a law, but more as the rule, if you don't interpret it as the rule, that's your choice, but they become the standard of care. And so it'll be interesting to see how the associations will address that. And I'm going to be contacting our association to see if that's been a conversation, because that's really, in my opinion, our only way to resolve it is to report it. And when you look at an agent doing something that is outside the standard of care, then that's inconsistent with our code of ethics, and it's a problem. And it makes us all look bad. And unfortunately, the consumers don't know. They don't know what we're allowed to do or not. They are probably recognizing, I think we talked about this last week, they're probably recognizing there's not very many open houses. So when they see one, they may or may not question, is it allowed now or not? You know?
Yeah, and Lauren has a comment here. She said, I thought you could do virtual open houses where people could stop by as long as they called and filled out a PED form beforehand, even if it's on the road that they filled it out electronically.
Well, when you look at the letter of the guideline, I suppose technically, yes, you could get away with that, but you're really not supposed to be advertising that you're doing an open house. A virtual open house is when the agent is at the property and someone registers to view the property online. Not they register to come see it. That's an appointment. That's a showing appointment. So if you're advertising, hey, this house is going to be open between 11 and 1 today, contact me for your appointment. To me, that's skirting the line a bit.
Well, and possibly too, you may be better off doing the virtual open house one day and then telling people if they're interested to make an appointment maybe the next day, where you're not doing it as the actual virtual open house. You're using that as something to facilitate showing appointments. So then that way you have a little bit of a delineation between the two. I know last week, and I think I brought it up, I showed a property, and I had made an appointment and did everything exactly like I was supposed to. And I showed up and it was a full-on open house, except for the only thing was it said virtual on the 10, 15 signs leading to the property. With the big open house flags at the front and the doors wide open, and there's flyers and notepads, and I don't even think there was a jar of hand sanitizer. So that was really kind of a shock for me. And I was talking with another agent this morning, and she said she saw 2 of those going on in the city that she's in. And it was like, what do we do? What do we do? So, maybe, take a photograph. And, I don't know if that can be done as an anonymous complaint or not.
I think so. I think it should be able to. If you've got, date and time and a photo, I would submit it that way.
Okay, well, I guess that pretty much tells us what we should be doing. But yeah, and we're doing this for safety. It's not like we're doing this just to, impede people from doing business. I'm a big open house. Well, I was a big open house holder. I don't know what I'm going to be doing now. And so I understand the urgency of wanting to get back in there, getting out in the neighborhood and being seen and stuff like that, because that is really important to our business. But at the same time, we've got Cal OSHA regulations, and that's really what they are. They call them guidance, but it's you must, and they're really mandates. And we've really got to be careful what we do, especially with the numbers going up like they are going up. So we still need to be safe. It's the virus does not respect the fact that we're bored and upset and want to get out and go on with our lives. So
right, yeah, and using the word virtual in that way is just all kinds of wrong. It's that is not the
virtually going to walk into this guy's open house.
Right. It's more like actually an open house instead of virtually an open house. Virtually is electronic. It's a electronic's not really the right word either, but it's an online open house where you as the agent, you're there and you are allowing people a sneak peek over FaceTime or Zoom or whatever you want to use to see the property. That's a virtual open house. If it's a showing, it's a showing. But to advertise something as an open house, or to advertise just come on in and fill out your form on the way over and you get here at 2:00, that's, it's, you're going to get called out by other agents. And that's the thing. I mean, we may not get it right. So somebody may report you and you may be doing something completely right, but you have to look at the optics of how you're handling something. And if it can be perceived as outside of the guidelines, then you want to adjust what you're doing. Don't do it or adjust it. As you described, you know, do the virtual on Saturday, schedule, hey, they've seen the photos, they've watched the virtual tour, they've done the virtual open house with you, and now they want to see it. Cool. We have appointments scheduled on Sunday. Then that is completely legit.
And Pam says, always ask if they have a realtor.
Good.
And maybe they'll tell you the truth.
Right. Right. So we covered
And you
a
might
lot
even remember their name.
And eventually you're going to be using that open house form as well.
That's right.
So we covered a lot today. I mean, I think our intention was to try to keep these around 30 minutes, but with a lot of new forms, you know, it's important. And again, I don't know when they'll be released, sometime this week, but check back in the group. I'll do a new post when I see them, just to let everybody know, and I'll put in the links. I'll put in the links now so you have the page that has the red line versions. And, you know, some of it we're just going to kind of have to learn together.
Yes, definitely. Especially me and you're going to have to learn them together.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okie dokie. Well, I think that that was a 57-minute meeting that was well spent. Hopefully everybody learned something, and be sure to come back Monday. We know it's kind of a little short notice Monday on the event thing, but you know, we got a pretty good crowd in here. So invite a friend and have them come learn something. So okie doke. Well, everybody have a great week. Lori, thank you as always, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.